Newsfirst, Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali.
Very good evening to you and a warm welcome to Newsline Zoom. Our guest this evening is Dr. W.A. Wijewardena, who's of course the now retired, and the former Senior Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. Very good evening to you, Dr. Wijewardena. Thank you for joining Newsline.
Thanks, Faraz, for having me on your program.
We do miss not seeing you, of course, in our studios, but what to do?
Well, Faraz, now in the modern communication era,
yes,
in-person appearance is not necessary. It's not essential today. Therefore, we can connect with people even in outer world, in the outer space also through the modern communication era. And so that is what we are right now doing.
Very good, very good. But nevertheless, grateful that you're on the program. So, Dr. Wijewardena, really the question is, we've been waiting since, we defaulted on the 12th of April last year. We've been waiting for months and months. We were told all sorts of things. We were told December, and December 31st also, we had some members of Parliament telling us that it is happening. And now they're saying that it's the 30 by the end of March. Of course, the question is really, why is it so difficult to obtain assistance for Sri Lanka?
One reason is that in the case of Sri Lanka, our situation is completely different from any other member country.
Yeah.
The International Monetary Fund, as long ago as February 2020, have made a debt sustainability assessment of the public debt of Sri Lanka. They had found that our external debt was not sustainable.
Yeah.
Now, International Monetary Fund cannot lend to any member country whose debt is considered to be unsustainable in terms of the assessment that its staff would do. So we didn't take any action at that time, and as a result, our foreign debt actually became unsustainable. We used our foreign reserves to repay our foreign debt and also to maintain an artificial exchange rate. So as a result, by the end of December 2019, Sri Lanka had foreign reserves of about $7.6 billion US. That came down to near zero level by March 2022. So in April 2022, the central bank and the Minister of Finance had to make an announcement that they are not repaying any of the maturing debt in respect of the commercial debt, as well as the debt that they have obtained from the bilateral member countries. So that was effected on the 12th of April, and we started working with the International Monetary Fund only after that. But to even apply for the International Monetary Fund assistance, we have to restart the debt restructuring program in the case of foreign debt. And that was a very difficult task. Now, still it is going on for us. And in the case of the bilateral debt, the debt has to be restructured with respect to borrowings that we have obtained from the Western countries, India and China basically. And Western countries are, of course, willing to go along with the recommendation of the Paris Club, the informal agency at which the debt restructuring negotiations should be done, to allow a reduction in the principal and the interest, which we call India is also willing to go along with that kind of debt restructuring program, but China is still not willing to do that. And China didn't want to go through a similar haircut in the first instance. They said that it would give a new loan to Sri Lanka, and that loan will be used by Sri Lanka to repay the old debt. So it will therefore be a new debt in the books of Sri Lanka. Now, our problem today is not to get a new loan. Our problem is to use the existing debt. So China has become a country which is now impeding this particular program. Most country for us, what they did, though, they have said they will at most give us a 2-year debt moratorium, and at the principal and the interest that we have to pay to the principal amount, which would actually increase the overall debt position of Sri Lanka rather than reducing it. So we are now in a very difficult situation.
So basically what you're saying is that it might not, it's only academic now, but what you're saying is that Sri Lanka wasn't proactive at the beginning.
Exactly. I mean, now if Sri Lanka had taken this message delivered by IMF in February 2020 that our debt was unsustainable, we wouldn't have fallen into the present situation. Now, if a country like Bangladesh, they have become very proactive for us because their foreign reserves were about 40 billion US dollars, and they have predicted that it would fall to 30 billion US dollars in year 2023. So by November last year, they started negotiating with IMF for a special facility. And by early February, they were able to get it, some 4.7 billion US dollars from the International Monetary Fund. And because they were very proactive, our action was actually reactive. Reactive in the sense we waited until the things had happened, and then we took action which wouldn't have been totally difficult for Sri Lanka to accomplish, because right now we have another problem. In addition to China, the international sovereign bond holders of Sri Lanka, they have organized themselves into an informal group, which they call the AGDO group. They have written a letter to the managing director of the International Monetary Fund last week. And in that letter, they have several issues. They have said the domestic debt of Sri Lanka should also be reorganized, which means the debt should be, in fact, restructured. Then they have said the total gross financing requirement of the government, which stands about, say, 28% of GDP today, should be reduced to 13% of GDP between 2027 and 2032. So that's a very difficult action for Sri Lanka, because what it means is the government of Sri Lanka will have to shrink itself. It has to cut down all its expenditure programs drastically over the period, and which it means that we cannot have these tamashas, various, extravagant, expenditure programs. They all have to be cut down, and we'll have to actually bring the Sri Lanka government to a level of normal citizen where it will be able to meet its own expenses. So we are now the difficult situation for us.
So would that include not spending money on like the Independence Day celebrations?
Well, yeah, it's a choice. I mean, actually, given the present situation where Sri Lanka government has to shrink itself in terms of this IMF program, and also has insisted by the international sovereign bond holders, who also have a very big stake on Sri Lanka, some 12 billion US dollars. The government of Sri Lanka cannot have these, unnecessary expenditure programs. Now, because if we don't make this choice correctly right now, we are getting into a serious trouble in the future.
And Dr. Wijewardena, why do you think that Bangladesh had to go to the IMF? I mean, they lent us money. Well, they're better off than us.
No, for us, they gave us 150 million US dollars in a soft facility, and which Sri Lanka had to repay it in May. But they have extended it by another 6 months time period, because they are actually truly a friendly neighbor for Sri Lanka. Why they had to go to IMF was that they had a very comfortable foreign reserve level of 40 billion US dollars. But given the increase in the oil bill and also the other expenditure programs, their foreign reserves were projected to fall to about 30 billion US dollars by year 2023. So they foresaw the oncoming economic problem for the country. So therefore, they took a proactive action rather than being reactive like Sri Lanka. They told IMF that they cannot manage their affairs independently, alone by them, and therefore they want a facility from IMF. So they applied for that facility long after Sri Lanka had applied. That was done in November 2022, and they were able to get it by early February. So as a result, they took a proactive action to prevent a situation similar to what Sri Lanka is experiencing too.
And I don't want to engage in a blame game, but for the benefit of our fellow citizens, whose fault is it? Who failed?
Of course, all the top economic policy leaders of the Gotabaya Rajapaksa administration, starting from the secretary to the president, Dr. Jayasundara, then the state minister Ajit Cabral, then Central Bank of W.D. Lakshman, they had continuously maintained that IMF is not the solution for Sri Lanka. So as a result, they said that they had some internal domestic strategy and domestic resolution plan, and therefore they will be able to overcome the present economic crisis through that domestic resolution plan. But it didn't work. So as a result, day by day, our position became weaker. And once it had come to a level where we no longer would be able to repay our foreign debt, we had to default it. So this is actually one of the biggest economic mistakes made by the top policymakers of the country. Now, why I say so is that, people like us, the independent analysts, we had continuously advised Gotabaya Rajapaksa administration to seek IMF assistance, because I can remember I wrote an article in December 2019, along with the tax cut which Gotabaya Rajapaksa had introduced. I said that it is time for you to seek IMF assistance, but this was not heeded to. And as a result, day by day, the conditions of the patient weakened. And finally, after the patient was about to die, then they had to seek advice from the IMF. So that is the reason that we are in this particular trouble.
So are you saying that this is a joint effort, a joint mistake, if you like?
As far as it's not actually a joint mistake, but that is because due to some certain misreading of the history, economic history, as well as the international economic adjustments, because
But by whom?
By the three
Israeli?
people. I mean, by the three people who were the top economic policy advisors of the Gotabaya Rajapaksa administration. Because not only other, because even the ministers were telling later that they were not being properly briefed by these top policy economic advisors.
Okay. And of course, I also asked this question because in the light of the recent Supreme Court order for compensation that was made against the former President Sirisena and the various officials of his administration in connection with the Easter tragedy. And I think that there's also an ongoing matter before the court about the economic mismanagement of the country. So that's why I'm asking you that question in the context of that. But do you think, on a wider scale, do you think that this is a good move, that it indicates to public officials that they cannot shirk their responsibility and that they must deliver and they must act as sort of fit for purpose?
Well, there is in economics, for us, there's a principle called economic policy accountability.
Right.
What it means is that if you make a mistake in your economic policy, which would be disastrous for the nation, there should be a mechanism to assume accountability for that. Now, what is happening here is now everybody knows that Sri Lanka had been in trouble, and we had gone through we are actually going through the worst of the economic crisis that we are facing in our history. And also the economy is now bankrupt. In every respect for us, economic is bankrupt. So therefore, whatever the judgment delivered by the Supreme Court, not only today, even I can recall, even in 2007, Chief Justice Ratnanda Silva, he also delivered a similar justice with respect to the Water's Hotel case, as well as the Sri Lanka Insurance Corporation. And these are good lessons to be learned by the people who assume top positions in the government, who will have to decide on the fate of the Sri Lankan people. They have to, at the same time, when they assume the responsibility, they will have to assume the economic policy accountability also.
Mm-hmm. On that note, let's go for a quick break and take a peek at this evening's headline news from the Primetime News team, and we'll rejoin Dr. W.A. Wijewardena retired senior deputy governor of the central bank, soon after this break.
Newsfirst Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali.
Newsfirst headlines. Main sponsor.
Durden's Hospital, dedicated to you.
Newsfirst headlines. Main sponsor.
Durden's Hospital, dedicated to you. Experience the best in healthcare at Durden's Hospital's new Alfred Place wing. We continue to evolve into a purpose-built hospital of the future, with an ambience built to deliver world-class care. Durden's Hospital, dedicated to you.
Newsfirst Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali.
And welcome back to Newsline Zoom. We are in conversation with Dr. W.A. Wijewardena, who was, of course, the senior deputy governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, and very well known for his independent analysis of various matters financial. So, Dr. Wijewardena, what about this letter that is supposed to have been sent to the IMF by India then?
Well, Indian letter simply tells us far as that India is willing to go along with the Western countries. India says that, if the Western countries and in the Paris Club, because India is not a member of the Paris Club, it is just an observer. If the Paris Club makes a decision on Sri Lanka to cut down its debt level by taking a haircut in the principal as well as in the interest rate, India is willing to go by that. In other words, India has given its expression, its willingness to support Sri Lanka's debt restructuring program. But the same thing had not been done by China. Chinese letter simply says that it would give us a debt moratorium for 2 years, during which we don't have to repay our debt to China, the installments that we have to pay half yearly. And that would be at the end of the 2-year period, that will be added to the principal amount, and then we'll have to repay that also over a longer time period. What it means is that India wants Sri Lanka's debt to be reduced from the current level. Now we have $33 billion owed to the international sovereign bond holders, plus the commercial creditors and the bilateral creditors. That level has to come down for us by about 50%, to about 15 billion through the restructuring program. Then our debt level will come down. But the Chinese solution is China holds about 53% of the total bilateral debt that we owe to the rest of the creditors. And China's solution is to increase our debt level. So that is why we are in a great difficulty here. That is why the visiting Undersecretary of the State Department of the United States government also had said that China will have to actually make a better offer to Sri Lanka to allow Sri Lanka to have this debt restructured. So our current problem is, unless we resolve this particular issue amicably to suit the requirements of the International Monetary Fund, our getting a bailout from the International Monetary Fund is getting deferred day by day. That is why, the goalpost is shifted to a future date every time. That's what happened today.
And Dr. Wijewardena, what is we read in the press some time back about this most favored lender status, or words to that effect. What effect does that strategy have? That is because when it comes to this debt restructuring program, if we offer a certain concession to a certain country, certain creditor, that particular concession will have to offer to all other creditors also, which we call the principles of equality. And this ad hoc group of the international sovereign bond holders have called it principle of comparable treatment. So what it actually means is that if I give you for us a certain concession, which should be the benchmark
for me to address the issue with other creditors also. So if we give the concession to China that we will allow China to give us only a debt moratorium and not a reduction in the principal amount or the interest, we have to give the same concession to other creditors also. What it means is our debt restructuring program will not be a successful one because our current issue is, presently Sri Lanka's public debt is about, say, 140% of our GDP.
Yeah.
To be brought below 100% by year 2027 and 2032. And we cannot do that unless we reduce the principal amounts. So we can reduce the principal amounts only by getting the creditors to agree to fork a certain amount of the principal amount.
And how sustainable is it that when China says, look, we don't want to give you a haircut, but we'll extend your term and give you a moratorium of a couple of years? How sustainable is that?
It's not sustainable because it's not actually in line with the proposal made by the Paris Club, as well as in line with the understanding which Sri Lanka had with the International Monetary Fund. And therefore it is totally outside. So what Sri Lanka should now do is to use its the diplomatic relations successfully to get China to agree to what the other creditors are going to offer to Sri Lanka. Otherwise, what will happen is the most favored lender, the position where we have given a certain treatment to China, we will have to extend the same treatment to other creditors also. So it will not help Sri Lanka to restructure its debt. It will not help Sri Lanka to get this IMF bailout package. And if we don't get the bailout package, we are in serious trouble because our foreign exchange situation has not improved in the recent past.
And, talk about this principle of equality and so on. Will this also mean that the local debt will be subject to the same sort of treatment that is being proposed for the international lending community?
Well, it is a fear now that we have because this ad hoc group of the international sovereign bond holders have written to the managing director of the International Monetary Fund that the local debt should be reorganized. They don't use the word restructured, they say reorganized in a manner that the debt should be sustainable. Now, what they actually mean by the term reorganize is also in the same as debt restructuring that we are talking about. And the debt sustainability means, Vara, that if the country is able to borrow money from the market to repay the maturing public debt, then that debt is sustainable. But if the country has to print money to repay this debt, then the debt is not sustainable. Or if the country has to default it, again the debt is not sustainable. Now, to the credit of the central bank's new management, the central bank has done its best to get everything from the market in order to repay the maturing treasury bills and treasury bonds so far. But in the last auction that they offered last week, what happened was that they had offered 120 billion treasury bills to the market, but they got only 38% from the market, and the balance had to be printed by the central bank. So what this means?
News First headlines. Main sponsor.
Durden's Hospital, dedicated to you.
What will the President's policy statement contain when he ceremonially opens the new session of Parliament tomorrow? Mahasangha to converge in Colombo against the 13th Amendment to the Constitution. L.A. Gunawansatero wants young blood to take charge of the country. Trade unions to protest in Colombo against the unjust tax regime. Doctors to go on strike for 24 hours. No activities at state and private hospitals. What happened to the diesel donated by the government of China? And what happened to the 10,000 rupees allowance? Farmers question the government. Rescuers scramble to reach the worst affected areas in Turkey and Syria. Death toll passes 5,000.
News First headlines. Main sponsor.
Durden's Hospital, dedicated to you.
This means is if this trend continues for another 2 or 3 auctions, there is a case for the international sovereign bond holders to insist that the domestic debt should also be restructured along with the foreign debt. So central bank is trying its best to avoid this situation, because if it happens for us, the biggest casualty will be the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, which holds about 2.5 trillion worth of treasury bills right now. And if there's a haircut of say 30%, so it will be about 720 billion rupees that central bank has to forego. And the central bank's capital is only 400 billion. The central bank will become bankrupt. So will be the Employees Provident Fund, National Savings Bank, People's Bank, Bank of Ceylon. So it's a big problem for the entire financial sector. So that is why central bank is doing its best to avoid it. I hope central bank will be successful in maintaining that position, even though in the last auction, they were able to get only 38% from the market.
And Dr. Wijewardena, I know that you were working alongside your colleague, who is now the governor of the central bank, Dr. Nandalal. In your independent and cold assessment, as though you were a judge, and you only dealing with the facts. Do you believe that Governor Nandalal Veerasinghe is doing the best that can be done for the moment, or is there room for some improvement?
In my view, he is doing his best, and I'll have to give credit to him for that purpose, because given the present very unsustainable political and social conditions of the country, he had been maintaining the independence of the central bank very fiercely, and he's taking correct policy decisions at the right time. And as a result, I can give credit to him for us that he's doing his job well. And therefore, I have no any complaints about what he's doing right now.
And there's no however. You were not going to say however anything.
Well, what is happening is now most of the things that are happening are beyond the control of Dr. Nandalal Veerasinghe. For example, China's reluctance to agree with the Paris Club members that Sri Lanka should be given a haircut is beyond his control. That is actually a matter for Sri Lanka's president and the foreign ministry to resolve, because it depends on the ability of president and the foreign ministry to use their diplomatic talents to get China on board. So that is beyond the control of Dr. Nandalal Veerasinghe, and all he can do is to bring this situation to the notice of the foreign ministry and the president of the country. Then other things are happening about the domestic debt restructuring also. Unless he increases the interest rates on treasury bills and treasury bonds, I fear that he will not be able to get the entire thing from the market. So as a result, because he's been pressurized by the government to keep the interest rates at the current level. And when you keep it at the current level, what is happening is that he will not be able to get everything from the market. And if he doesn't get everything from the market, then there is a case for restructuring the domestic debt also. Now, all these are actually beyond his control and beyond the control of the central bank.
And almost finally, Dr. Wijewardena, the obvious question, where are we going?
Well, in my opinion, unless we get this IMF bailout in time, even by the end of March, situation will become worse. And also we will have to face a very worse situation in Sri Lanka. We will have queues again, we will have power cuts again, we will have shortage of essential things and raw materials for industries again, we will have unemployment, we will have a shrinkage of the economy continuously. So all these economic ailments are there and looming over us menacingly And if we don't get this IMF bailout, so that is why we had been advocating the government of Sri Lanka should do its utmost to get this and get the other assistance from the ADB, World Bank, and the friendly countries like India to resolve this position. It will help Sri Lanka to temporarily overcome the current economic crisis.
And Dr. Wijewardena, last question though. What about what's the scenario like, very quickly though, what's the scenario like if the local debt is also subject to a haircut?
Well, central bank will become bankrupt, EPF will become bankrupt, ETF will become bankrupt, National Savings Bank will become bankrupt. We have a massive financial sector instability.
What about senior citizens?
Because now senior citizens like us, we have our savings with the country's financial system.
Yeah,
the financial system is devastated by a tsunami like this. Senior citizens will also get washed by the tsunami.
So in plain English, that means that if that happens, our fixed deposits and so on will also be cut.
Well, not a cut. I mean, if the financial sector fails, we all lose it. I mean, this is the possibility which I think central bank is trying its best to avoid.
And do you think that's why there's a delay in reaching agreement with the IMF?
No. It does not. So far, the IMF has not said that the domestic debt should be restructured. It is only this ad hoc group of international sovereign bond holders have asked for a reorganization of the domestic, which actually, in simple English terms, means restructuring of the domestic, not the IMF.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wijewardena, for your time with Newsline Zoom. We much appreciate that. And that's the way it was on Newsline Zoom tonight. We'll be back with just as much an interesting guest as Dr. Wijewardena was, discussing the matters that are affecting you, the people, our people, the people of Sri Lanka. Take care, have a great evening, and as always, God bless you all.